universities in the UK. So, dear presenters, the floor is all yours.
Okay. Pandemic that we planned and designed with Irina and Mike in June 2020. We wanted to apply pedagogies of discomfort in intercultural citizenship education, and the project involved students in an Argentinian university, language undergraduates, and students in a university in the United States. Thank you, Irina. So, pedagogies of discomfort introduce difficult themes in the classroom. We are following Micalinos and Vilas here, and what are the themes? What are difficult themes? Difficult themes are related to social and historical trauma. They are associated with contexts of genocide, war, dictatorship, all kinds of human rights abuse. These pedagogies have been used or are generally used in history classrooms, in civics classrooms, geographically in areas of countries that are under conflict or have been under conflict. That means conflict past or present. And the themes are said to be difficult, or the themes are difficult in two ways. First, because they create emotional discomfort in students, and then because it's channeling to respond to these emotional discomforts pedagogically in order to create healing openings. We were interested in finding out if these pedagogies are relevant in language education, in language and intercultural communication, and also in contexts that may not be crisscrossed apparently by any specific conflict. Sorry. Yes, Irina, the next one. Okay, and our point of departure is Mike's notion of education for intercultural citizenship that combines instrumental purposes for language education with educational purposes, such as, for instance, the development of, or contributing to the development of democratic and peaceful and just and sustainable societies. And what are we taking from pedagogies of discomfort? We are taking this idea that there is the need to sensitize students to issues of human suffering. And what we did in this project was combine this idea with art-based means of meaning-making, so as to channel the discomfort that difficult themes may give way to, for instance, the COVID-19 theme. And this is our basic idea. So the project took place in June 2020 during 2 weeks. As I said, there were language undergraduates in Argentina in a foreign language class, 15 students. And then in the USA, there were 10 students from different, speaking different languages and coming from different countries in an introduction to intercultural communication course. And these are the premises that we, from which we departed. I have already said something or have told you about them. I forgot to mention one key idea. Why did we connect pedagogies of discomfort with the arts? Well, on the basis of this idea that language use is not or cannot be separated from its bodily and emotional dimensions. So we are thinking not only about the linguistic expression or the ways in which we can make meaning in linguistic ways, but also through, for instance, artistic ways. And now, yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. To provide a general idea of our project, we will describe the 6 stages, how we organized our students' work. The students began the first week with the baseline stage, and they began it by completing the pre-project survey. After this stage, they individually researched and collected some examples of how the theme of the pandemic had been approached artistically in their countries, respectively in Argentina and in the United States. During the awareness raising stage, they shared their corporate reflections in small groups and jointly created an artwork accompanied by a group report. And then in week 2, the dialogue stage, the students were put in mixed nationality groups and shared their creations and discussed their discomforting content and associated emotions. After that, in the following 2 weeks, the students collaboratively design an art-based creation intended to channel their personal feelings and emotions that would make a contribution, or we hope that they would make a contribution to their societies and the global community in connection to the COVID-19 pandemic. As you remember, we started our project in May, June 2020, so 2 months after the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. And as you remember, we were all devastated, stressed, we felt anxiety, and we couldn't even imagine in our worst dreams that it will last until today. So that was the idea of that stage. And then at the action stage, they were asked to seek an outlet for their artwork. That is to go beyond the virtual classroom, for example, via their social network or blogs, and carry out an awareness raising campaign about the emotional dangers of the pandemic, following which we invited them to continue working on their civic action. And they had to write together in their mixed nationality groups civic action statements. And finally, during the reflection stage, students were invited to complete the post-project survey. So the analysis of students' artistic multimodal creations, written reflections, and pre- and post-surveys indicated that students engaged emotionally and artistically with the discomforting theme to create openings for empathy, solidarity, and hope. And they showed that they were willing and able to engage with discomfort productively through community-oriented activities. The evidence and the extracts from their reports can be found in the recently published paper by Melina, Mike, and myself. After our presentation, I will share the link to this article in the chat box. So the adjectives students associated with the COVID-19 were predominantly negative, referring to their suffering from the crisis as feeling anxious, confused, isolated. But there were some adjectives that express such positive emotions as empathy and optimism. And also students mentioned being reflective and thoughtful during these unprecedented times. In this slide, you can see some of our students' artwork, and in our task guidelines, we offered them absolute freedom to choose the artistic way of expressing themselves. So as you can see, some groups submitted drawings or posters, and other groups recorded films. And we would like to show you one of such films, which we find particularly interesting. So we believe, and actually our student feedback confirms this, that the project helped them to understand that there are different ways and opportunities to act as a citizen by serving, for example, to local community. And here are the examples of the civic action plans our students have developed. Melina?
Yes, in Argentina, the students shared their artistic creations used in their social media. They translated information about COVID-19 to their family members and friends. They also engaged in some concrete actions, such as helping the homeless in their neighborhood or in their city. In fact, donating food and that kind of action. And also some of them joined existing outreach projects at the university that were operating or working on the outskirts of the city, for instance.
The US-based students envisioned their participation in civic activities in a more traditional, I would even say typical for the local culture way. These activities were, for example, donating food and clothes and volunteering, and also raising awareness through the social media. So based on students' feedback, this project helped them realize that they are not alone and that they belong to the global community. Our students reported that art helped their emotional well-being and helped them express what they weren't able to express with words. And now I pass the word to Mike.
Thank you very much. I think what's been shown here by Irina and Melina is how language teaching, communications teaching, and so on certainly goes beyond an emphasis upon linguistic matters and communication matters in the narrow sense, and introduces these humanistic perspectives. I think the point also is that the emphasis upon difficult topics, on discomforting themes, it's not something that has never been touched before, because indeed Melina has in the past dealt with difficult or discomforting themes. But what's interesting and new here is to put that in a much broader, what we can call humanistic perspective, and bring in that creative dimension that we saw briefly from the video and from a brief look at some of the other productions that they had. And I thought it was interesting how at the end, emphasis upon not being alone and being able to talk is not just a matter of talking and communicating in any narrow sense, but using their creations to express their emotions. So that those humanistic dimensions, as it's there in the second point, are all part of this emphasis upon different ways of making meaning and sharing the emotional dimensions of the meanings that they make through that artwork, which we saw, and that artwork then being turned into work in the community and activity in the community of different kinds, social and civic engagement. So all of that gives us a pedagogy which fosters solidarity, empathy, and hope. And again, I remind you what the video finished with, that the pandemic has produced a safer environment, and hope was one of the words at the end of that video as well. But all of this raises ethical challenges, which are not being part of our presentation today, but clearly when one encourages, as a teacher, encourages students to get involved in discomforting themes and involved in the local community, then that has ethical issues, pedagogically ethical issues that we must bear in mind as well. I think that's all I need to say to remind you of the main points that Melina and Irina have presented. Thank you.
Thank you. I stop sharing.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this insightful presentation about a beautiful experience. I'm pretty sure that there must be some comments and questions by the audience. So if anyone has a question, you can use directly the microphone, or you can use the chat box as well.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Sorry, could you provide some context here? Where did this fit in the curriculum of what they were doing? Who were the students?
Yeah, I can take this question, and then I will ask Melina some information about her students. So in case of my students, US-based students from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, these students were coming from different disciplines: biology, information systems, business administration, languages, English language, psychology. So this was the undergrad course called Introduction in Intercultural Competence, and it was built in their 4-week-long summer course. In case of Melina, Melina, I pass the word to you.
Yes. My students are language undergraduates, aged between 18 and 21, 22, and they are studying to become enrolled in a 5-year program to become future professionals of the language, translators of English, English teachers, or interpreters. So,
Yeah,
and the course is a language course, English as a foreign language course.
And it was interesting that in case of my students also, although we assume that students were native or native speakers of English, or English was their first language, as it is more appropriate to mention, but actually we realized that out of 10 students that were in my group, the majority had a different first language, like Hindi, Farsi, Spanish. And it was very interesting because one of the strands of my research is translanguaging. And with Melina, we on purpose didn't ask them to translanguage or didn't mention them. We just was were curious to learn whether they will automatically start translanguaging, given that they are put in to communication with students from Argentina, and they did. They translanguaged. So they used all repertoire of their first languages. There was another video again. I will immediately share the link to our article. So the link to the other video is shared in our article, and it will be very interesting for you to see what kind of languages they use in the video productions.
Thank you. We have one more question here in the chat box by Manuela Wagner. Manuela says, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. My question is practical. Was it more difficult to get the human subjects research approval, what we call IRB approval, because of the term pedagogy of pain?
Again, if I may, I think I have to take this question because with Melina, we realized that procedures are very different. And those who know me, you know that I moved to the United States from the Hungarian academia. So I know how different procedures can be in different countries. So the University of Maryland, Baltimore County is a teaching-oriented university, or we are R2 university, but even in our evaluations, faculty evaluations, teaching plays a more salient role than research. And that was very, made my life very easy, answering Manuela's question, that if you prove that this is to improve your teaching practices and to revise your courses, then it won't be a difficult problem to go through IRB. So it was approved by IRB very swiftly.
Thank you. We have, yes, we have yet one more question from Constanza Tolosa from University of Auckland. She says, gracias for the presentation. Along the same line as Manuela's question, can you provide more detail about the ethical issues mentioned by Mike?
Shall I start?
Yes, please go ahead, Mike. Thank you.
I'll start it and you can continue.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, in a sense, these are not ethical questions peculiar to this project and this kind of work, but they're heightened, I think, by this kind of work. All teachers, as we know, I'm just telling you what you know now, of course, all teachers want to change their learners. That's the notion, that's what learning is. It means change in the learners. But in this case, we want them not just to change cognitively, as it were, and learn some new language, to put it in language learning terms, but we want them to change in their attitudes, and perhaps one might even say in their character, their sense of belonging to the community, where in the final stage they take some kind of activity or action and some engagement. So all of that heightens the responsibilities that teachers have when they walk into the classroom, heightens those responsibilities because it leads to activities outside the classroom. And one of the problems that, I mean, I'm now citing and thinking of an article which Manuela, sitting there, Manuela Wagner and Melina and I wrote and published not so long ago. One of the things that, one aspect of all of this is to what extent the learners can, as it were, consent to this process. Can they, of course, in research terms, we always ask for informed consent. And Irina has just pointed out that in this case, it wasn't seen so much as a research project as a pedagogical project, but there is a research dimension to it, and the same issues arise. That we might well ask the students if they're going to consent to being involved in this kind of project, but they can't really know what they're consenting to, because the whole purpose is to change them and to bring something new into their lives, into their thinking, and as I said, almost into their character. So those are the kinds of ethical issues which arise. There are no simple answers to those issues, and neither now nor in the article that we wrote. But these are things that we think all of us as teachers just have to be aware of and take on board and do the best we can with.
Also, maybe the simple decision of dealing with difficult themes presents ethical dilemmas or an ethical positioning on our part, because who are we to decide that the students need to be faced with trauma in the first place, right? And I wanted to mention in connection with Manuela's question that we don't have that kind of ethical boards in our universities. So here we just simply, if you are conscientious enough, you just simply follow the guidelines and procedures that you read in books and know from colleagues.
Yeah, and in case of my students, well, I wouldn't say that only my students felt that double pressure or trauma, but exactly the day when we started the project, May 25th, 2020, it was the tragic day when George Floyd was murdered. So students had a lot of topics to discuss, and they saw the interconnection. This is exactly what Mike and Manuela were talking about today, how the pandemic brought and make even more salient all inequalities and injustices in the society. And I believe that we did good job as pedagogues. We offered that opportunity to discuss these issues with students coming from different cultures. So it was, I hope they benefited. But of course, what Mike mentioned at the end of presentation and Melina confirmed, as teachers, we are worried and we want to do the right thing.
Perhaps you could just say, one or both of you, how it was decided and who decided that this particular theme should be addressed, and how it was decided that it should be addressed in this particular internet cooperative project as such.
I think Melina was the engine.
We were just the pandemic had just appeared, and we were all in lockdown, and we thought that it would be a theme that our students would need to channel some feelings in connection with the theme. The situation would be different now because students are tired. So it was a very good time, so to speak, June 2020, to carry out the project. And how did we do it? We I don't know, we just thought and sat down and thought of a project to do, something that we could do together in collaboration.
I can see that Manuel has a hand up.
Yes, Manuela has a question. We have 2 more minutes, fortunately.
Manuela is muted.
Yeah, my question is broad, so it would be difficult to answer in 1 minute or so. But anyway, when I read or listen to projects like this one, which are very valuable, I wonder how the language teacher sets the line for the students if they are in class, they are not voluntary participants. So how do the teachers set the line with regard to privacy matters? And the other question related to this is how the language teacher also sets the line when psychological issues, traumatic issues come out, and we are not certified to deal with the psychological issues. So this is my interrogation about how to deal with these issues, privacy and psychological counseling.
In case of my students, they had the opportunity to step out of the project at any point of that. So the core, the course was credit bearing, but participation in the project wouldn't affect their grade. So it was up to them. Some of them chose, for example, to participate in the videos and to record themselves, but those who just wanted to be less visible and not to open up to that degree, they had their option. This is the beauty of art-based approach, that there are all different ways of expressing yourself. And in addition to informed consent, there was a release form in that they had the opportunity or to agree or to prohibit sharing their creations, their artistic creations. So it was quite transparent. Melina?
Yeah, Alexander is saying that our time is up. Two things that I would like to say is that in Argentina, the participation was voluntary. Students could drop at any time. In fact, one of them did. And sometimes we think that students will behave in a particular way, but we had, for instance, one student who explicitly wanted us to use her real name in any publication or conference or whatever. And then importantly, we did not provide any psychological counseling. The arts fulfilled that role. We just set the guidelines for the week, for the stages during each week of the project. And it was the arts that were the channeling or helping students emotionally. We did not provide any psychological counseling. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation, and a big round of applauses, virtual applauses for the presenters. I'm going to introduce the second presentation, Soft Diplomacy in the New Triangle, Transnational Language and Cultural Policies by William Brashears from Arizona State University. Professor William, the floor is yours.
Yeah, could I get the sharing? Let's see. I need to share my PPT.
Yes. Bear with me just a minute, please.
If I can help, I think in our case, we had access through the share screen at the bottom. There was no problem. Have you tried that, William?
Do not have the share screen at the bottom.
Okay, let me see what happened there. Dana Gomez, if you are around here, we need to grant Professor William the right to share.
William, you can also
they say they're on it. Yeah, it should appear in any minute.
Or you can send it to our chair, and it will be shown from a
yes, that would be another possibility. If you want me to share my screen, I will be more than happy to help you pass in the slides.
Okay, let's see. Sorry about this.
Yeah, we are really sorry about.
Usually I get a invitation for screen sharing. Let's see.
William, are you using a PC or a Mac?
A Mac, yeah.
Oh okay.
Yeah.
That changes everything.
Okay. And
Sorry, if you can press Command Shift S at the same time, Command Shift S.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
You will see that you can share your screen if you press it correctly.
Still not seeing. We could have the third presentation go ahead and then let me send it to you via email, if that might be easier.
I'm quite happy to do that. Ireri, are you okay with that? Ireri is the president.
I think we just need 1 second.
Okay.
There is one person from support coming. Just 1 second, please.
Okay. Well, I could start without the presentation as well. If, Okay.
Professor William, I am going to share my email address in case you want to send me the presentation, and I will project it for you if you want.
Okay.
All right, it's there on the chat box.
Okay.
Seems you can share now, but it's okay if you send it to Alex. No problem.
Profe Beatriz, es que no me aparece la opción de permisos para el profe, pero ya los debería compartir, ya tendría que aparecerle en la pantalla. No sé cómo, él está en un computador, ¿en qué computador? ¿Estará en un Mac o en un PC normal?
Sí, está
Está
en un Mac.
Mac, ¿no? Está en un Mac, pero no aparece la opción de compartirlo.
So I
Sí.
think maybe the best option would be Alex's option. If you could send us the slide, if you could send Alex the slides and he can show them for you.
Okay.
Alex, is that okay for you?
Señora,
Yes, absolutely.
Perfect, great.
Okay.
Check.
You
click check.
What's done?
profe Beatriz, pasan la presentación a Alexander para que la comparta.
Alex, ¿el profe ya te mandó la presentación?
No, aún no ha llegado a mi correo.
Profe, lo que podría hacer también es, a ver si nos funciona, traerlo a la sala principal y si desde ahí le puedo dar los permisos y volverlo a entrar a esta sala. No sé, si le parece, lo intentamos.
Creo que nos demoramos mucho.
Sí,
Uh,
pues, bueno,
William,
pues,
did you send the slides to Alexander?
I did. I'm sending once more. It's
Professor Beatrice, or maybe we can try with your email address. Mine is pretty long, so that might be confusing as well.
it's been sent.
Okay, let me check real quick. No, I haven't received it yet.
You have my mail if you want to resend it to me to see if I can get it.
Ya. ¿Lo ha recibido?
Yo no la he recibido.
No,
Ay,
no.
Dios.
Let me check in spam. Let's see if.
Pues que siga la tercera persona, por favor.
profe, intentémoslo sacar de la sala y yo lo traigo otra vez y le doy los permisos a ver si me deja desde la sala principal, por favor.
Okay,
Sí.
okay.
Lo voy a sacar
so
un
let's-
momentico, profe William.
Okay,
yes.
And so meanwhile, shall I present the third presentation?
No,
Sí, cómo
you're
no.
going to be taken away from the room and returned to see if we can get you the role. Just 1 second. Thank you.
Professor Beatrice, I received the presentation. It's in my inbox now.
Okay,
So
Okay.
I can
perfect.
present it if you want.
Go ahead. Just open it just in case Alex proposal is not working.
All right. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Ya comienzo.
I can see William right now. I can see, yes. Now.
Okay. Okay. Sorry, Dios mío. So this is going to be very challenging to get through a very ambitious presentation in the first place. But this really is about, and I'll tell you, Alexander, cuando quiero que lo mueva, ¿no? ¿Verdad? So could we go to the next slide, please? Okay. Okay. So this presentation really is about a cultural language network that was formed in China. It was called the American Culture Center, and through that network, it was a network that often is compared with the Confucius Institute network. And so the idea of this presentation is to look at the new theory, or a theory that's been more popular recently, that is this theory is coming out of international relations, and it's more of a Chinese centered research, and there are several theories that are very popular now. This is just one of them, and one of the theorists that is describing Guanxi, and I think we've all been studying and using Guanxi in many fields over the past decades, but this is a new take on Guanxi that really describes the management of these communication networks, and this presentation is looking at how the American communication network, the American Culture Center in China, was considered some kind of a failure, and how the Confucian Institute network and the larger Chinese communication network has been evolving, and looking at Latin America as the region of growth. So could we go to the next slide? So next slide, please.
I'm passing the slides. I guess if you can see that.
I can't control the slides, right?
No, you can't. But I'm passing them, and I wonder if you, I mean, I see that they go to the next one on my screen, but I don't know if you can see the same.
Yeah, go to the next slide, please. Next slide, please.
This one?
Next. I'm going to run out of time here, so I'm going to.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so Qin Yaqing is the theorist that we're looking at in this presentation, and he's really been dealing with Guanxi cultural communication in an interesting way. He's really looking at it. Can we go to the next slide, please? Next slide, please. So his theory is called the relational theory, and it's. Next slide, please. Okay. Can you go two up here? We're out of order. I'm sorry. Yeah. That one up. Número 6, por favor. Número 6. Okay. This is very challenging. Sorry. So let's look at Qing Ya-Qing. What is his theory, and why does it apply to all of these cultural diplomacy networks so well? It's a theory that really can be used to explain many things in the academic world at this time. So his relational theory, number one, is the world is interrelated. So you really you're not there are no independent actors that are operating by themselves. So really, the Chinese view of this is a social world as ripples in a lake, interconnected with one another and forming concentric circles. And it's composed of overlapping relational circles of people linked together through differentially categorized social relationships. So he argues that this view is in contrast to the Western one, that the social world looks like bundles of rice stalks in fields, standing on their own, independent of one another. The second assumption is that these actors are only actors in relations. That means that identities and the roles of social actors are shaped by social relations. You really don't have any absolute identity of the self. It's a constructed and you are reconstructed and reconstructed in relations with others and with the relational totality as a whole. You might think about the Chinese game Wei Qi or Go, where all the pieces look alike and they only gain meaning through their relationship with other pieces. Or you might think about the system of Chinese characters that can be a Chinese character by itself, could be a noun or a verb or an adjective, depending on its relationship with other characters. So you're really, there's no me in isolation, that you're abstractly me. So, so collectively, this weaves a unique pattern of personal identity. The process is a key point, here for the relational theory. So you cannot be enclosed in your own private world of thoughts and feelings. You need to be reaching out, in touch with others, to communicate with an ever-expanding network of human relatedness. An actor in relations is thus, by definition, an actor in process, which may produce and reproduce for identities and define and redefine roles. So international society is a process rather than an entity, and it's becoming rather than being. So this theory really is looking at how the process changes the nature of the relationships. Okay. How much time do I have, by the way, Alejandro?
Oh, I think Professor Beatrice is managing your time.
Okay. Do I have 5 minutes left?
I guess you do, Professor, yeah.
Okay. There's going to be a lot that we're going to cut out here. So let's move down the slide progression. Si sea tan amable.
Yes, it's just that my internet is very slow right now, so I'm trying to go back to the slides.
It's a process. It's a process. So really what this, what we're missing, what I'm missing from the time here is presenting you the networks of language and cultural diplomacy from both the United States side, the Chinese side, and the Latin American side. So can we go down, Alejandro? Si baje,
Yes.
si baje, si sea tan amable, hasta la primera fotografía, ¿no? No. Así, ok. Y vamos rápidamente, ¿no? Con estas fotografías. So this is the American Culture Center, and it was formed in 2010. So we at Arizona State University, I was the director of the Sichuan University American Culture Center, as well as the director of Access. And we were the management arm of the American Culture Centers in China. La próxima, si será tan amable. And so these are some of our, this network does not exist anymore. And so understanding the way that this was built is quite interesting in comparing cultural networks of communication, not only from the diplomatic side, but from the way academia in the United States works, and how it works together with China in that process. So la próxima. So we were, la próxima. La próxima. So we had all these are all the centers you'll see. These are the universities. La próxima, por favor. You will see each American university was partnered with the Chinese university. And it was quite, we had about 20 partners at the height of success of this network. La próxima, por favor. So you'll see each university is independent in its management. So when you're looking at the cultural communication of this network, although this is financed out of the United States Department of State, each American partner had complete autonomy with a hands-off attitude from Department of State. And each of these centers was located inside of these Chinese universities. And so you might, that entire experience was quite interesting. Each university came up with wildly different programs. La próxima, por favor. La próxima. There were many kinds of activities coming out, language and cultural training activities coming out. This is an essay writing project. La próxima. Okay, la próxima. So many, you'll see sporting events. There's the Klezmatics, a famous group in the United States. Music groups, art groups, intellectual forums. La próxima. La próxima. This is the we just saw the Argentine and Mexican embassy and the Mexican Chamber of Commerce. They're all talking about the presence of the perception of Latin America in China. These are all different kinds of intellectual forums. This is sometimes called forum diplomacy. Those of you that have been in these types of Chinese forums. La próxima, por favor. There were exchanges of innovation, exchanges of entrepreneurs. There were, all kinds of network development pieces. La próxima, por favor. La próxima. And so many of the United States centers were focusing on, these are company visits. There were investment seminars, investment forums. So many, you'll see, la próxima, por favor. The United States universities, this is Lalo Alcaraz of the Disney director of Coco, the movie. We had him talking about the representation of Latinos in the United States. Many of these American universities took a critical angle on presenting American culture. La próxima. La próxima. La próxima. Sigue, por favor, sigue. Okay, these are the tango studios in China. You've got hip hop studios. You've got all these different businesses that represent cultural exchanges. La próxima, por favor. Próxima. 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 So some of the problems with that this network had were involved in the Guanxi relationship, and because of the independent nature of these centers, there was often the systems, you could really clearly see how communication networks are different from the US perspective and the Chinese perspective. And this is how Qin Yaqing is really, he really has a great angle with his theory on how the Chinese communication networks work. The way that we would work with Chinese professors, they would be certainly receiving a hierarchy of communications coming from the Ministry of Education, moving down through the Academy of Social Sciences, and to their specialty in that particular university. That specialty would be combined with, okay, gracias, Beatriz. With the BRI and with the employment of students in universities with industrial policy coming out of China into Latin America is very well managed and organized. So if I only have 2 minutes, let me see. Can you go a la próxima, por favor? Próxima. No. Próxima. This would be the description of what the Confucius Institute and the Chinese initiatives in Latin America are how those are developing now. This would be the part of this presentation. So, la próxima. La próxima. Sigue. So the Confucius, sigue. Sigue. These are students that we've had that are now working within the Latin American China network, both in the industrial sector, the cultural sector. Sigue. Sigue, por favor. Sigue, sigue. Sigue, por favor. Sigue. 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 So these are the Confucius Institutes. There's a lot to say about them. They represent one part of the Chinese communication network in Latin America. Sigue, por favor. Sigue. 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 Okay. 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 Ahí. So, sorry about this desastre, ¿no? Pero these networks, the use of this new theory, or theory that has been worked on for a while but now is becoming popular, is very interesting. I wish I could have presented it clearly to you, but there's no question that Latin American countries are using the new communication, cultural communication that is suggested by this theorist, by this Chinese theorist, along with other China-centered theory and research. So that really is just one piece of it. China, Mexico. This is the head of MexCham, the Mexican Chamber of Commerce. This really represents Mexico's most sophisticated cultural communication network in China. They're the only Chamber of Commerce that involves the Chinese Communist Party. So they're very much into they're using the tools of communication that have been suggested by our theorist, Mr. Qin. So, okay. Ya se acabó el tiempo. So, sorry that was a mess, but I can't really control the slides. So, if any questions, I mean, I'm sorry that
we still have time for questions. You can use some time for questions. 8 minutes.
Okay. Questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I was thinking because, my own university, we have quite strong relationships with China, with some Chinese universities, and I'm just thinking in terms of the current foreign policy situation, particularly if China invades Taiwan, which people, my colleagues in political sciences think will happen. I just wonder how what the stresses are going to be caused in terms of these, particularly, well, from my perspective, Anglo-Chinese relations and North American Chinese relations, in terms of, the intellectual relationships you're trying to have.
Yeah, right. Well, we have 5,000 Chinese students on campus. We're the top U.S. university for Chinese students. So it is something that we've been developing networks with China for several decades, and so you do have the academic side. we also lost our Confucius Institute at Arizona State University a year and a half ago. And there were quite a few Confucius Institutes that were removed from campuses, which you know, is another piece, a complicated issue as well. But you know, from my perspective and from the perspective of many, the academic perspective, maintaining the relationships is important no matter what happens. And improving, you know, continuing dialogue and communication is critical. So that's really the stand that we take. The political side is very difficult right now. But we still maintain our relationships. We've got you know, 3 decades of working with China doesn't go away in 1 year. So, but I think I think the looking at the Chinese network in Latin America is very instructive and interesting. Now. And I think Chinese-centered theory describes very well the communication networks there. And I hope that if any of you are interested in Qin, I think he's one of the leading theorists that of Guanxi, of the new kinds of Guanxi that are becoming more like policy now. You know, so it's kind of like intercultural theory becoming a real government policy.
Okay, Professor William, thank you so much for your presentation, and we apologize for the technological inconveniences we had. Let me present the last presentation of the afternoon. Se han apropiado de todos los gringos, the discursive construction of a gentrified Mexican city by Christopher Anderson from Canterbury Christ Church University and Ireri Armenta Delgado from University of Guanajuato in Mexico.
Hello, thank you very much. Well, thank you all for joining us today for the presentation of this paper. My colleague and good friend, Christopher Anderson, Dr. Christopher Anderson, and myself, Ireri Armenta, are here to present the findings of a collaborative research project between the University of Guanajuato and the University of Christ Church, Canterbury in the UK. The study looks at the impact of mostly North American migration and tourism into Mexican cities. This is done from the perspective of language and intercultural communication. So the research question was, how does language and intercultural communication in the cities of San Miguel de Allende and Guanajuato, and in the relationship between, how they manifest, and the relationships between locals and non-locals. We will argue that interculturality is somehow suspended. But let me first provide a brief description of the context of the investigation. So Mexico is, more specifically the state of Guanajuato, has not been the exception to the increase in intercultural exchange. More and more, Guanajuato welcomes people from all over the world. Nevertheless, being so close to the US, it is only logical that there are more people coming from the northern neighbor country. Such an exchange of people has had an impact on the social construction of these two important cities. However, as the study developed, it became more focused on one city, with the other city used for purposes of comparison. That is, San Miguel de Allende became the primary focus, and Guanajuato the comparison city. The shift in focus was built around significant changes that have happened in San Miguel de Allende. The increase in terms of the American population in the city being one of them. So San Miguel de Allende is a small town located in central Mexico. It is about 2 hours from the city of Guanajuato, which is the capital of the state of Guanajuato. In the 2020 census, the population of Mexico was fixed at about 130 million people. The state of Guanajuato has a population of 6 million, The population in the city of Guanajuato is about 194,000, and San Miguel de Allende 174,000, of which 20 or 25,000 are Americans. The numbers vary because some foreigners live there full-time or part-time. However, the American population is the largest minority group among foreign nationals living in the city. So the gringos have appropriated all. What makes people say that? Why do they say that? Chris will be providing a description of what we found in San Miguel de Allende while doing our field work there. But before he does that, he's going to briefly describe the methodology used for the purpose of the investigation.
Hello. Yes, so I'm going to very briefly describe the research design because obviously with the limitations of time, I could go into a lot more detail. We call it a geo-ethnographic discourse study, taking the idea of geo-ethnography because we are doing it as two people with two completely different identities. I'm British, Ireri is Mexican. And so to a certain extent, Ireri has a kind of insiderness and I have an outsiderness. This gets a bit more complex, but that's the basic idea. So that we are exchanging ideas on the data that we're collecting, interpreting and looking at our different interpretations of the data. So this involved fieldwork in terms of participant observation between Ireri and myself in San Miguel de Allende and in Guanajuato, in using classic field notes, photographs, and so forth. But in addition to that, we had student research assistant accounts. I called them research assistants because they weren't. They acted as, this is Ireri's undergraduate students. They acted as research assistants collecting data for us, but also they wrote accounts for us. So we asked them questions. It was a kind of a form of a written interview, if you will, while others took part in a closed Facebook discussion, all on the subject of this notion of interculturality in San Miguel and Guanajuato. And also, in addition to that, we have put together a very large corpus of texts from hard copy text, social media, websites, news media, mass media, all in relationship to the cities, and then later on with more emphasis on San Miguel, which was in some way or another concerns this topic. So I'm going to sort of do a brief overview of some of the findings in terms of the impact of American migration and tourism on San Miguel de Allende. And then we're going to move on to looking at some counter voices to the voices, if you like, of the American migration. And then finally, we're going to look at the issue of middle-class Latin American tourism in San Miguel. So to begin with, as Ireri has already noted, there is a very large population of North Americans in San Miguel de Allende. And that's to the left in this image, that is an American tourist. And we was particularly interested in this because even the taxi cabs kind of have English on them. And it was I took that particular photograph. But this process of American migration and tourism slowly began in the 1940s when San Miguel de Allende became an artist colony in effect, for Mexicans as well, indeed, but particularly for Americans. And this sort of developed in the 50s and 60s. So it became known as a kind of center of bohemian North Americans, artists, musicians, what have you. But in the 1970s and 80s, there was a shift to more professionals and retirees. So there was a kind of change in the kind of population moving, and as Ireri said, you have some North Americans, and when I say North Americans, I'm including Canadians, but the majority are from the United States. Some North Americans have places where they come, if they come from places like Texas, they come to escape the Texan summer. So they come for 6 months, and then the other lot from New York, from the north of the United States, will come to escape the North American winter. In terms of the profile that we get of this type of North American, and please note that they describe themselves, they self-ascribe themselves as expats or expatriates, which is a very, if you like, debated term, but I will use the term expat knowing that there are problems with it, but that's how they describe themselves. They tend to be middle class, educated, politically liberal, Democrats, didn't find any Trump supporters, not surprisingly, and if you like, cultured. What the effect of this has been is an Americanization of the city that we find throughout the data, and a gentrification of the city, and therefore the city becomes this sort of hybrid American-Mexican city. And we see this Americanization in terms of property. So this is a screenshot from an advertisement for a house. Housing in the center of the city, the downtown, is dominated by North Americans. It's sold in US dollars. The real estate shops, everything is in English. The prices are in US dollars. The infrastructure of the city, the leisure, the goods and services, and cultural consumption. So there is a kind of hybrid between this historic Mexican city that has been preserved for tourism and certain elements of Americanization, which I'll begin to look at in terms of places, products, services, the use of the English language, which all form, and with various other components, are very much an established US community. So in terms of places, products, services, the local government, and this has been over decades, has supported, very much supported through infrastructure such as highway, water, electricity, over the decades, the American migrants. And secondly, in terms of residential property, so if that image in the center is an example of one of the old houses which have been restored. So the whole of the center of the city, you see lots of these properties where they've been bought and restored. And also in new housing developments further inside the city, in other parts of the city, with the appearance of gated communities as well, which is very significant. And also in external Mexican investment. So this is investors from, say, Mexico City investing in restaurants and hotels as well. So the products on offer in the city center appear to be aimed at North Americans in terms of shops, bars, cafes, restaurants, art galleries, arts and crafts. So for example, in the photograph on the top right, you have a patisserie selling sourdough bread. This is not typically Mexican whatsoever. That's just one small example. And in terms of cultural consumption, so on the left, you see a poster for a play, an English language play, I believe an American play, a British play. So in the theaters, there is a lot of cultural consumption and education. So these products, in terms of the beautifully restored houses, the services, the cultural consumption, conform to what I would call a hip liberal urban middle class culture, which can be found around the world, and certainly is not distinct to San Miguel. If you, in certain parts of New York or London, you will find these things like gourmet hamburgers, craft beer, Birkenstock sandals, these sort of signifiers of this particular middle class hip culture. And as probably already seen in some of the data that I've shown you, is this use of English, which is quite extraordinary. And I've only ever seen it. I've traveled a lot in Mexico. I've only seen this in places of mass tourism, such as Cancun. I'd never seen it in historic cities in Mexico. So the written English language, as these examples, could be seen everywhere in street advertising, shops, services, bars, restaurants, cafes, in the main church in the left, in arts, education, in the realtors, and the texts are either bilingual, Spanish, English, but often in English only. There's one main road that goes out of the center, which is full of international restaurants, and it is obviously has a strong North American presence, where in many of the restaurants, as in this example, the third example, the menus were just in English. And also you will find in these shops lots of printed material, guides, lifestyle magazines, maps. That walking and shopping is an example where it's all 90% in English, maybe a little bit of Spanish here and there. And you know, in terms of perception, in terms of our participant observation, you know, spoken English is everywhere. But in addition to this, in the kind of the mass media and the social media that support this community, whether it's be through newspapers, also in television and magazines, guides, blogs, vlogs, community Facebook groups, English absolutely dominates. So what you have here is an established American community in terms of the infrastructure, goods, services, and so forth. Much of what is sold is in US dollars, including property, houses, and I was perceived as an American, and I was always given a dollar price when we were, you know, in terms of our participant observation, we were acting as tourists. We were participating in a kind of tourist experience. Furthermore, in terms of education, bilingual schools, the art university in Instituto Allende, lots and lots of craft courses, yoga courses could be seen. In terms of, and most shockingly for me, I was absolutely flabbergasted, as can be seen in this image, there's an Anglican church. This is an Anglo church. You know, I'm at an Anglican university. I went to Anglican schools and I was astonished there is an Anglican church. The art galleries, theatres, concerts, leisure, shopping, food, drinking, housing, as already mentioned, and indeed a US consulate. So it's everything makes up this strong embedded US community. So the question is, why? Why do they come here? Obviously there was this art colony that was set up, but what happened after that? Well, when we looked at the texts and this very large corpus of text, you can see that there is a great deal of social media and mass media online, which is advertising or encouraging visitors. And whether it's in the top left, you can see one example was a website devoted to expats, as they call themselves, in Mexico, encouraging people to retire, whether it was like a personal blog, which was more aimed at tourists on the bottom left, or whether it's this screenshot from a YouTube video, this is a YouTube channel for a realtor. And in it, this particular video summarized beautifully what attracts or how, in two ways, how San Miguel de Allende is sold by fellow North Americans, and we assume that's what attracts them there. So there is the notion, the 4 C's, culture. So there is a comparison between, say, the highly commercialized resorts of, say, Cancun. This is a cultured, historic city, a beautiful city, the beauty of the architecture, the local festivals, the art, the music, the food, the friendliness and hospitality of the locals, the mild climate. The community is sold, that there is an established American community with a range of associations, whether it be golf, art, tennis, bird watching, that you can take, you have a life there to retire there. And finally, and of course, in some ways, most importantly, cost. It's cheap. So that an American family or Americans going to retire there, knowing that the property is cheaper, that they can have a domestic help, gardeners, food, healthcare, even taxis are substantially cheaper than the United States, and which is obviously an important cost. It's beautiful, it's a lovely culture, it's cheap. We'll move on now to Ireri.
Thank you, Chris. And I see that you put here that we have 5 minutes left. Okay, so let me go on then. So as seen in this description provided about San Miguel de Allende, there's evidence that helps in understanding why and what had led people express that the gringos are appropriating San Miguel de Allende. During our 4-day visit doing field work in the city, we saw evidence of the Americanization of the city. So look at this picture, for instance. In this picture, one might wonder, where are these people going? In fact, it was very common to observe people walking together, going shopping, or on their way to meet with their relatives and friends to meet for drinks or dinner. Restaurants were crowded, mainly with groups of Americans. There were 2 instances, in fact, where Chris and I were having lunch or dinner, and where we particularly noticed very little presence of Mexican people. Indeed, one of these times, Chris said to me, "There, you realize you are the only Mexican in the restaurant." Soon enough, I looked around. There must have been about 30 to 40 people sitting in this beautiful terrace. And indeed, I was the only Mexican there. Thus far then, next slide, please. Here we have some of the things that began to emerge. This table, in the next slide, Chris, yes, shows the dynamics taking place in San Miguel de Allende. The included self, the excluded other. The included self, Americans use their language English and expect people to use it as well. As one waitress reported, they, Americans, get upset when we use Spanish with them, when we talk to them in Spanish. They hang out together, they go shopping, eat out, etc. Locals do not seem to be taking part in these activities, in these gatherings. Prices appear in dollars, and many products are priced expensively in dollars. Restaurants, hotels, galleries, spas, and sports, hiking or riding are not necessarily for local people. So expectations are particular to their cultural practices. So the locals, Americans report, don't take credit cards. They get upset because they can't use their credit cards everywhere they go. So they want to use their credit cards and everything and want to pay in dollars. So then at this point, a review of some of the key basic and key principles of interculturalism as offered by many of these scholars that we know, such as Claire Cramsh, Michael Byram, who was here this morning, Scollon and Scollon, Helen, Otti, Spencer, and Franklin. Tell us about interculturalism. What does it refer to? The meeting of people from different cultures, communicating, interacting between different people's cultures, the building of relationships between the self and the other, the ability to mediate, to explain, to accept difference, the capacity to discover and relate to new people. So based on these principles, we argue that interculturality seems to be suspended. Americans make little effort to mediate their culture and or engage with the other, the locals. On the contrary, they have created the familiar in the foreign environment. In the process, locals seem to be excluded, as shown in this graphic. So I hope we have time, Chris, but Chris is going to share some of the qualitative data that we got from interviews to our research assistants, as well as some blogs, YouTube videos, and other media that reflects the voices of individuals, local and non-local, visitors or residents to San Miguel de Allende. And this data shows adds to the discussion at hand.
So what's very interesting is that this notion of suspension of interculturality was identified, not using a technical language, by both our students and in some other contexts. So the sense that something is wrong with San Miguel, that it's lost its authenticity, which is which is in contradiction with what many of the North Americans selling the city, saying it has a Mexican authenticity. So that, and this is often compared to Guanajuato. And what is even more interesting is that travel blog forum comment at the bottom. That's a North American who lives in Guanajuato. So many of the North Americans who live in Guanajuato also complain about San Miguel de Allende. There are too many Americans. It's become too Americanized. As opposed to Guanajuato, which is more authentic, which is more Mexican, which is exactly my observations in my field notes. That is interesting. Then there is the negative, what has been identified, and also actually identified in some Mexican literature, and particularly in urban geography, the negative effect on locals. So it's a perception from some of the students, it's perception on social media, and it's, there's some literature on this as well, which is about the economic development not benefiting all. So this is classic gentrification theory in terms of San Miguel being extremely expensive. So from the perception of the North Americans, it's cheap. Perception of Mexicans, it's really expensive. The displacement of people having to move out the center of the town. The inequality and preferential treatment towards Americans, particularly by the government, the local government, that there is a sense of privilege that the North Americans have. Also identified in the perception from our students was the behavior of North Americans, that they were not willing to adapt, to integrate. And this seems very different because there's a very interesting book, A History of San Miguel, in which it was identified that the earlier Bohemians did integrate. They married locally, they learned Spanish, but a sense that this new wave of retirees don't. And this sense of expecting gratitude, which is basically saying, we've got a lot of money, we're helping the economy, you should be grateful we're here. And again, this was a perception of some of the students who from Guanajuato and have experienced the city, and a sense that they have this superiority. And finally, in terms of this type of data is the wider social media data from Mexicans who actually don't live in San Miguel, or certainly with a little bit of detective work. So we had this quotation is from a Mexican, interestingly, on an American site called Expats in Mexico, a Facebook group, describing it as a colonial tourist trap, a Disneyland. And then there was a Twitter post on the left, which is from Visit Mexico, advertising San Miguel for Spanish speakers, we assume, predominantly in Latin America, Mexico. And then here he says, we found it difficult to translate fondongos, but that they basically appropriated the whole place. They've taken it over. However, there's another dimension, a final dimension, which adds a level of complexity. So far it looks like there is a kind of simple binary, local Mexicans, North Americans. There are middle-class Latin American tourists, and lots of them. And these middle-class Latin, and this photograph is an interesting example of that, because there was a mariachi band. My interpretation of this particular experience was, that's typically Mexican. He said to me, actually, no, this is tourism, and they're definitely not locals. It cost about $28 US for one song. So, these two here are not local. And the makeup of these people are either rich, middle-class Latin American, Mexican tourists from large cities like Mexico City, North American Mexicans, so Mexican Americans, or Latin Americans. So they kind of fit in, but obviously the predominant group are these middle-class Mexicans who are taking pleasure in this city. And this is a fascinating dimension to this. And these people talk about it, the city. So there is this whole fascinating genre of YouTube vlogs, travel vlogs, and this is just some examples of some screenshots, where you have young Latin Americans whether Mexican, whether from North, actually all of these were either Mexican or from Mexico or broadly from Latin American Spanish speakers, who are praising the wonders of San Miguel. Some of them note that it's quite expensive. Some, for example, the couple on the right were budget travelers. They were staying in cheaper hotels. The woman on the left with her friend had lots and lots of money, went to the most expensive restaurants, and so forth. So they're kind of taking pleasure in this city. So
go ahead and then.
Okay, so I didn't realize who that was. Okay, so this photograph neatly summarizes the situation. And again, there are some interesting signifiers. Now, for people who are not familiar with this particular breed of dog, this is an English Bull Terrier. And I was astonished to see it in Mexico. And it's a really expensive breed of dog. It's expensive in the UK. And, you know, we are absolutely certain the two women on the left are you know, from Mexico City or from, you know, a richer middle class. On the right, there happen to be two Americans. And in the center, you have a beggar. Now, what's very interesting is compared to Guanajuato, there are a lot more beggars that come into the city. It's a strange dynamic. So you have this strange mixture of people. And what these middle-class Latin American tourists seem to be doing is they're taking pleasure in the hybridity of the city. It's as if they're attracted both, and this is the evidence is in the videos, that they're attracted to the traditional Mexican culture, the history of the city, but they're attracted to the expensive clothes shops, the restaurants and so forth. So it's both elements are become important to them, and it's, you know, what attracts them to the city, and particularly at the weekends, as we discovered. So is San Miguel Allende just another victim of expatriate migration? And the question, and by the way, just that photograph on the left, for some people, that is actually a British bar in southern Spain. So that's a kind of, you know, a victim, if you like, of a mass expatriate community and tourism community. So you have this completely British, anglicized and British bar. On the right is a slightly more, there's a long story about that photograph. That's in central Italy. These are, if you like, expats and tourists. It's a more middle-class consumption. So these questions of the different types of consumption that towns have and cities have and places have around the world, particularly with expatriate communities, and the efforts that are made, if you like, to reach across to local communities, to engage with local communities, to learn languages. And I confess I'm in that category, because my wife is in that photograph, right? We have a second home in central Italy. So I'm part of this as well. I'm desperately trying to learn Italian to fit in and so forth. So this effort, it is about this effort that is it too easy for us to critique these people and say, oh, look, they're not bothering? Is it something that everybody finds difficult? How do you do this? So these are just questions that, you know, are posing it in our minds on this. Ireri, did you want to conclude, or should we stop there? You need to turn your microphone on, Ireri.
Sorry, yes, thank you. I think the time is up, so I think we can conclude with this. Now, I don't know if we still have time for questions or not, but meanwhile, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We also want, very important, because this project was supported by the University of Guanajuato, but also the UNESCO chair of the university. So we want to thank them for their support for this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your presentation, and thanks everybody who has attended. We have time for maybe one question before they shut down the room. Like that's actually my concern, that maybe they will need to shut down the rooms or
Malcolm? Your microphone, Malcolm.
Chico, I have a question.
Sorry.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm on the border, Mexico and Arizona. So, you know, we've been traveling into many of these kinds of Gringolandia places that include many cities like Chapala and Ajijic, you know, San Miguel. On Halloween, the kids do a Day of the Dead altar, and they'll do trick or treat as well to get you know, they've got this hybrid culture. You know, I would just say that this older, the Santa Fe, New York, San Miguel triangle, you know, kind of became full of investors, and you know, they invest in timeshares now in San Miguel. So it's, if you go to Querétaro down the road, you're going to get a different model, you know, and of course Guanajuato provides a different gringo model as well. The Mexican upper class that controls the downtowns of many Mexican cities has a role in this, I would certainly say. You know, the Mexican investors in the downtowns of cities are invested in keeping, not only they in these architectural digest visuals from San Miguel, you know, they say that at least the architecture has been preserved. But it's interesting on many levels, and it varies among all those cities as we're driving from the United States, I can tell you.
I mean, you know, it's been since the artists started coming to San Miguel, it's always been a kind of question that the local elites have had of where does the city go, and it's been aimed at, and it's been almost like preserved in aspect to make it a tourism city, to make it attractive, not to overdevelop the center, so that the historic center has stayed. And then it got its UNESCO status, which was the icing on the cake. And once it had that, that was how it was being sold. So it's always UNESCO World Heritage Site, San Miguel de Allende. So yeah, fascinating. Malcolm, did you have a question?
Yeah, if I may. Yeah, thanks very much, Chris Nereri. And I'm familiar with Chris's earlier research in the gentrification of Margate. And I'm interested in your kind of methods and methodology in this paper, because if I've got you right, Chris Nereri, you've added an ethnographic dimension to your analysis of the social media comments. And I just wondered what the dynamic between these two data sets was for you. Did you find the ethnographic data a kind of add-on and enriching of the social media data, or did you find certain tensions between the insights the two sets of data were giving you?
I know it's very interesting, because so we had our participant observation that we did together, and which was geoethnographic, and I think that was fascinating. But what was so interesting is the other data kind of supported it, and then there wasn't the sort of separation of the data. It just made this incredibly interesting, enriched set of data where you have these contradictory constructions of the city, which aren't necessarily based on simple, North American, Mexican, not at all. It's based around, where you come from, your local identity, whether it's from the students and other social media, or whether you have this kind of cultural and economic capital, so that you're able to enjoy the city like the middle class Latinos did. So yeah, so I didn't see that. I mean, Ireri, did you? I thought it all fitted very nicely together.
Yeah, too much of a coincidence, one would think. But yeah, it was Also, I think the one important thing to add here would be that the process of this data analysis was cyclic. And of course, as I added notes to the notes that we had, the macro documents that we created. Chris also responded to those comments. And so the data was developed in the way, the interpretation, and things that I didn't remember that happened, you know, things that I saw that he didn't see were integrated into this document. So yeah, and you know what, we sometimes go back to the document and we're still adding more interpretations, you know. And so the data analysis is still continuous and many new things are emerging from this data. Thank you, Malcolm.
Yeah, I was just going to add, what was absolutely fascinating, you know, doing participant observation was how, you know, your subjectivity and your interpretation of what's going on. And Ereri spotted things that I never saw, and it was almost a bit humiliating for me. It was like white privilege, because she's noticed that the maid in the hotel was treating me completely different to her.
Oh, yeah.
You know, as this, you know, this gringo who might give her a big tip. So I was getting all my towels neatly folded up, and my toilet paper, little patterns and things, and you know, and we know, and all of these kind of during the participant observation, during these kind of encounters, these kind of commercial encounters, service encounters, we just noticed, like at the car park, you know, how we were treated so differently. It was quite, you know, amazing. And Eri said, you realize what's going on here, you know, and realize why they're treating you this way. So you had this, you know, and you know, if I had just done that as an outsider doing some participant observation, I would have never picked this up, half of the stuff that's going on. And that was the beauty of a geoethnography, I think. So.
Okay, we have one last question by Irina Golugeva.
Yeah, if I may, and I do apologize if I missed anything, Chris and Ereri, because for some moment the computer was frozen. I saw that you shared examples from Facebook group, right?
Yes.
In that case, what was your procedure? Were they aware that you are researching this issue, or you were participating just, so was it a closed group, open group?
No, absolutely not. No, any data that we've used from social media are on public groups, so that, you know, we treat this as the same way that you would treat if you had an online newspaper and there were comments under it. It's public. We, you know, if there were, some of the groups were closed. So some of these, the Facebook community groups, you had a lot of these like expats in San Miguel, expats in Guanajuato. Some of them were open, some of them were closed. But the description of the groups was enough. It told you so much, the language being used, the attitude. But you know, absolutely not. If it's a private group, you'd have to join the private group. You'd have to get their permission. But if it's public, sorry, Rary.
Yeah,
yes,
thank you for
one group that we created was the one where we conducted the interviews with the student research participants in our project. Yeah. And that was a group that Chris created. We did the interviews with them through this group, and all students obviously agreed to the research project to participate in it. Yes.
Yeah, and that was a private Facebook group. So it was just a means of an interview. It was a convenient means because we're working, you know, across the world, as it were, how we can communicate together. But yeah, that in terms of ethics, absolutely, you know, if it was a private group, they have to, you know, we'd have to get their informed consent. If it was public, we treated it as public data.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I will send a follow-up question in direct message, just not to make this meeting longer.
Yes, thank you so much. And yeah, unfortunately, time is up, and the rooms are about to shut down. So I want to thank you all once again, the presenters and participants, for making this discussion so interesting and so enlightening. Thank you so much. I apologize once again for all the inconveniences in the previous presentation, and I hope everybody is able to join tomorrow for more interesting discussions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Alexander. Bye, Malcolm. Good seeing you. Bye, Chris.
Bye. Thank you very
Bye.
much.
Take good care.
Thank you, Alina, Melina. Bye-bye.